welcome to the Nested Healing Podcast. I am your host, Jess, and today we have three wonderful guests with us. We are going over the topic of how does trauma impact relational streams or just social interaction, all the fun, good stuff. Today we have Joe. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, Joe E.B. Live in Kansas City, work in the senior living business and an integral coach certified through New Ventures West.
Wonderful. Kirsten, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Kirsten Skipper. I'm originally Australian, but I'm living in San Francisco. I am also an integral coach. I was previously in corporate fashion and made a shift in recent years, wanting to live in better ways and support others to that same end. So that brings me here.
Last but not least, we have the amazing Cadence. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Cadence Petros, and I work for a policy research firm helping cities and communities figure out how we're all going to thrive here together. I, like Joe and Kirsten, am a certified integral coach. Nice to be here.
What is the relational perspective, and how does trauma impact relationships, and where do you guys want to start with this?
I'm happy to start us off. I think especially like through the lens of my own experience, one of the biggest ways that I found that trauma impacts relationships is that we see others and the world through the perspective of that experience. One of the qualities of traumas is that we're stuck in the past, in that moment, that experience, and it can sort of shape our perspective of what's happening in interactions. And so the world starts to look that way, not as safe, not as supportive, not as loving, not in our best interests. And that can have profound impacts on the way that we interact with others.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I would say from my standpoint, I do a lot of leadership coaching and involvement in working with individual leaders inside organizations. And you see so much of how they show up in that space and in relationship with other people of things that have happened in their past and situations that they've come from or where they worked out of. And either they've done some work to really be self-aware of what's going on inside of them, or they're unaware of what's going on inside of them. And so they're led to respond in certain ways when it comes to challenging, somebody who's challenging them, or some like a customer who's very angry at them, and how they respond to that, to the power of their voice in the room, and are they comfortable sharing it and being open to giving of their ideas, or are they timid and more shut down because of what's happened in their past. And so it shows up so many ways in the way in which they lead, in which they lead other people. Then it kind of just permeates like a ripple into the people that they work with in those relationships. And so from my standpoint, it's a big issue that we deal with, in coaching. All of us do deal with in coaching, but it really does have a magnitude, a big impact in the environment and the culture within a company, based off of how one individual in particular, could change the dynamics of that whole culture.
Mm-hmm. I think it's also important to keep top of mind that trauma, when it's unhealed, can do all of those things.
Yeah.
And traumas, once healed, can also be the doorway through which deeper, more enriching relationships can happen.
Absolutely. 100%.
Right. And so it's like in our culture, we talk a lot now these days about trauma. And, I think most of us have had our share. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to I think always bear in mind that it's not a death sentence, right? It is a thing that trauma happens, and a trauma response is a natural thing. And also healing is natural. Our beings want to be in a healed state. We create a whole lot of what would you call it, roadblocks in our culture for healing. But if we
Mm-hmm.
remove some of those roadblocks, and like you said, Joe, if we're self-aware and give ourselves a chance,
Mm-hmm.
then actually those of us who have experienced trauma and healed from them can be
Mm-hmm.
those who have the most close ties. And that gives me real hope.
Yeah.
I think also it's very interesting how like when we heal from trauma, both big T being more significant events versus like little T, which are like um, things we do as children that we like kind of that we do, like scraping your knee, kind of in some sort of way.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I think that when we heal from that and the responses from like interpersonal, meaning like person to person relationships, um, I think the significance is really grand and familiar wise, like with our families. I think that's where a lot of people kind of feel it the most, or at least for me personally, I feel it the most is like with family. Um, and I think it's very interesting, like seeing how like healing from that can cause healing outward, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
I think every time we heal something inside of us, we are doing something to heal the planet. And it can be as small as I go to the grocery store more healed or less healed, and my interaction with the people in the parking lot, with the checker, right? All of those things, those count. But I also mean that on multiple levels, right? That um, it is hard for us to measure right now the impact of more healing individually and how that impacts us interpersonally and on a collective. But I think that as our systems of measuring become more sophisticated, we will be able to show that my healing impacts your healing, right? And that there can become this virtuous cycle of healing, both in the specific relationships we touch, but also as a part of the collective, which
And
is
if we're,
a problem.
oh, go ahead, Cadence.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say, which is a problem because I think the opposite is also true, right? The
Mm-hmm.
more traumas build up and remain unhealed in
Mm-hmm.
individuals, the more our collective is also unhealed. And we can see the ripple effects of that also,
Mm-hmm.
right? More prone to give into fear as in the collective. And just like yelling fire in a crowded room can create this ripple effect. I think the
Mm-hmm.
more we have unhealed traumas, more people walking around like that, um, the more unhappy and complicated our world is.
I wonder if it would be helpful at this point too to maybe yeah, maybe just sort of share what we're talking about, healed sort of trauma, and that like when we heal that these interactions will be different. And um yeah, I don't know, I feel like it might be helpful to specify what that is, because I know in my own experience there's some things that have had a really big impact, and I'm very conscious of them now, and I can tell when they're up, and I have the tools to support myself so that I can be with that and then go into a place of interacting from uh, choosing my response. And I don't know if that will ever like go away, but there's the consciousness there and the capacity to allow myself to hold that and take a breath. And it's definitely settled over time. It's not such a big response. And there are some things that have truly don't bother me anymore. They really aren't a thing that comes up in my, in my sort of psyche, in my thoughts. Like it really has It's no longer debris that's sort of floating around in my system, ready to get sort of, sort of touched or sparked. And so there's that range too. So just maybe feel it's important to that when we're talking about healing trauma, that it doesn't necessarily mean this like magical endpoint where it's never a thing anymore. It's really that awareness of the ways that it shows up for you, so that you can choose how you interact, and that it's not in a defensive way that may cause additional suffering for yourself or others.
100% agree. And I think in my own experience, even for those things that I feel like are not floating around any longer, you just got to come around the track again, and and suddenly there it is.
Yeah.
Right. But my hope is, and I don't know if this is always true for my own self, but my hope is that each time it arises again, that it's not actually the same spot. Maybe I'm dealing or grappling with it at a more intense or core way. Or maybe I'm just coming around the cycle again. But it does feel like over time, even if it's just now I know when shame rears its head, or, whatever that sort of old habituated pattern comes up, that it is less frightening, it is less gripping. Maybe it's still gripping. Maybe I still, become reactive, but it does feel like as the years pass, I do have more spaciousness. And for me, that concept of am I contracting or am I expanding, are real hallmarks for me about am I operating from my more well place, or from more habituated and trauma response position.
And I think, Jess, you said something maybe in the intro of like how to heal in a relationship. And for me, in my experience, a lot of self-development over a number of years, and not really in a relationship in those times, and feel like, oh, I fixed that, right? Like, oh, this is great. I got this covered. I know what I'm gonna do now. It's all right. And then all of a sudden you're in a relationship, and then these emotions start coming up, and it's like, oh crap, now I got to actually deal with this, right? Because now but you want to do it in the confines of a relationship. So I think that's where relationships are good because that's where you realize some of this stuff. Like if I'm on my own, doing my own self work, my own self development, which maybe needed to happen. But at some point in time, you got to put that in. You got to like enter the game and get back in the game, right? And start seeing how you have to react and how things show up in your life. And so now that you're in it, it's like all of a sudden stuff's showing up. But the beautiful thing is you have more awareness that it's showing up. Where before I had no idea what was going on because I was numb inside and I couldn't feel anything. And the only emotion I had was anger or I'm okay, right? And so those were the only two. Now it's like, oh, what is this? Like, where's this coming from? Why am I feeling this? And then the acceptance of that it's okay to feel that.
Mhm. Yeah. And relationships, they're both the arena, right? Where where it all plays out,
Mm-hmm.
usually with higher emotion than in other kinds of arena.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But they're also, they can be sort of mechanisms for some of that healing to happen.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot about sort of the difference between codependence and interdependence.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I've had both kinds of relationships and with intimate partners. And my first one was very much a TP kind of codependent, we're going to prop each other up style. And that worked for a while, but over time it didn't work as well as we needed it to. And now in my current one, this idea that we're both continuing to do our own work, right? But we can also be in this relationship where we can depend on each other and essentially co-regulate. So when the things happen, whether it's the scraped knee or something more significant, that I have my own mechanisms for self-soothing and down regulating, and those are important like core components of my own wellness. But I also know I can get a hug, I also know that I can talk it out, right? And that safe space is a way that I can depend on to navigate so that these hurts don't actually become residual, unhealed things. They're just discharged mostly in the moment, which is lovely.
And Cadence, could you kind of explain the like both of those terms? Because I think for a lot of people we understand like codependency. I think the term and the word is thrown all around a lot, but interdependency is what you said.
Oh yeah, interdependence. I mean, and you know, again, this is the like caveat. Google it. Lady Google can give you a lovely AI definition of all of these things. I can tell you sort of how I think of them as being different. Um, when I think of interdependence, I think that I am whole and well in my beingness. Um, that doesn't mean I'm infallible. It doesn't mean I don't need help, but I am complete as a human, and I enter into relationships of all kinds, and sometimes I enter into very intense and intimate relationships. This one with my husband, right? And we operate in many ways as a unit. We are still distinct humans that are responsible for our own health and wellness, and we know that we can rely on each other for help, love, affection, fun, and other things, right? And I think where that's important to me is coming out of a codependent relationship where we really relied on each other for basic wholeness and wellness. I was missing things and needed him. He was missing things and needed me. And sort of together we could make it work, right? One of the rebound conclusions sometimes people can draw is I have to do it all myself, right? I have to be this self-contained independent unit that can just march through this world on my own. And I think when you like leave space for this concept of interdependence, you can be both well and whole and also reliant on other people. And that entails a vulnerability and some courage to 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 let the um, walls down, to offer kind of that soft belly that we all have, to another person, and know that that loss might happen in all the ways that loss can happen, but that part of the nature of our inherent wholeness and wellness is um, we could we would still go on, right? Even if we allow for that vulnerability and reliance on another.
I think it's a beautiful description of that cadence and thinking about I just had a conversation this week with a group and it was about, wellness and wholeness and being well. And so that includes boundaries, right? And we were kind of hung up on the word boundaries because it's almost like it can be weaponized of that walling off, right? I'm like, I'm not going to allow anybody in. And I love the description that you used of the soft underbelly of just allowing yourself to be exposed. And, the I have a bunch of cats, two cats here, and they just, that's their thing. They just, once you get to that point, they just roll over and they allow you to be, they're being vulnerable. And so I love that in that relationship of like, yeah, you are your own person. You can take care of yourself, but you also can rely on the other person for things that you need in support of what you're doing and reach out for that and allow yourself to be vulnerable versus just a huge boundary around you and a huge wall that you don't let anybody in and you're like self-contained.
Right. And cats are such a good example, right? We all know
Mm-hmm.
cats are warriors, even
Mm-hmm.
if they never set foot outside,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, and they've got really good boundaries, right? Like they might
Mm-hmm.
give to their belly, but if they change their mind, you're gonna know it real fast,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
I think, we don't have to be as twitchy as cats,
Yeah.
but we
Yeah, I
can
got one that
also,
you rub his belly and but you can still feel the claws. He's like, I'm letting you rub me, but you can still, I still have my claws that are really quickly to get to you.
that's right. And I think that can be a good sort of image to keep in mind because some of us when we've been wounded, right, there's real and rational, I mean, pretty rational fear of that vulnerability. And it's
Mhm,
like, oh, no, I can still have my claws, right? I can
mhm,
still
mhm,
and for men sometimes, right, this idea of like what is strength? And how do I exhibit both strength and vulnerability at the same time?
mhm.
And sometimes it's good to have pictures like that where you can see, oh
Yeah.
yeah, it actually takes courage and strength to be able to
Mhm,
um, be vulnerable.
mhm. Yeah, I see that so much with leaders and men in particular, right? It's just that I can't let anybody see me have any kink in my armor. And what they don't realize is that they're much more relatable as a leader. They're much more connected as a leader, and people will buy into where they're trying to go if there is that vulnerability to bring them into that versus just a sheer force of like the old school way of just do what I say and just do it because I told you to do it versus like, and I work with both men and women on this inside our company of just how to you can't lead through other people by just doing it all yourself. You can't be a hero and you can't be a warrior and just do this by yourself. You have to engage others. And the way to engage others is through vulnerability
Mhm.
and sharing that I can't do this myself. I need your help. I need to work together. This is what I'm struggling with. Can you help me with that? Right? Like it's just the type of communication we have versus always having to be put together and always the person with the answers.
Yeah, I think that authenticity, and it's something that we all internally, we all have our struggles, and we all sometimes try to carry the weight of the world on our shoulders and be
Mm-hmm,
on the unhealthy side of sort of independent. But yeah, we all have that vulnerability inside, and there's something so it's just so easy to connect with when you see someone being really real about that. And
mm-hmm,
of course, as humans, one of the reasons we've been so successful is that we have been able to cooperate.
mm-hmm,
Our ability to connect with others has amplified what we've been able to do as a species, and why we've thrived over others. And so really leaning into that, if I can have grounding in myself, but be open enough to connect with and leverage others around me, it amplifies all that we bring to the table, and that much, much more
mm-hmm,
can be done. And I know for myself, it's like there's something when someone is vulnerable in that way, and brings other people in, and names that they can't do it all themselves. It's like, oh, like it gives me permission to do the same and to step into that as well. And so yeah, I have lots of conversations, both to remind myself of like it's okay to be human, and to bring that vulnerability even into like the work relationships. And
mm-hmm.
that there's ways to do that really really help to bind people together in healthy ways where they can be really productive, cooperative, and supportive.
Yeah, and inside our company, like inside our company, we have a lot of Enneagram twos, which are just that natural nurture.
Mhm.
And we're in the caregiver business. We take care of people, and so when they have the capacity to care, to help take care of somebody, they just love it, right? Because it automatically connects them with their purpose of helping them and helping them in what they do. Makes them feel good because they're helping and nurturing somebody in that way.
Yeah, and then the shadow of that, right, is I'm the only one who can
Oh
help,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
And as a
Or I'm doing it to get praised. I'm doing it to get praised or
yeah,
recognized.
exactly. I think it's interesting to think about leadership and trauma and relation how
Mhm,
all of this shows up because if we've had messaging our whole lives that it is not safe to show up as we are, then vulnerability, particularly in high stakes situations like your livelihood, is very, very difficult. Right. And so it's like, how do we create in organizations? How do we create the conditions where all people can show up as their authentic selves? We still have norms and ways of being in an organization, but that it doesn't require so many masks all of the time. And I think, it's hard for old school men. It's a different kind of difficult for women and Black and brown people, right? For genderqueer folks, right? For disabled folks. I mean, like people with different identities who have different realities, right? And who have, because of the societal norms that they are constantly coming up against, right? Showing up in their full self, right? Can be dangerous. And so
Mhm.
we don't, it's this tricky thing organizationally about how much we say we want you to show up as your full self if we are not also offering the supports, the cultural ways of being that actually make it safe to do that. And so I think uh taking like a step-by-step approach organizationally is really important so that we can be sort of keeping our eye on the prize where we know as a cooperative species that is more effective, more bound together, more happy when we are able to connect on an authentic, real basis, that we can actually help each other um, manage through the buffeting waves of life, that we want to move towards a set of situations organizationally in our other relationships, in our family systems, where we can all do that and also not assume that it can happen overnight. Because if it is actually unsafe for me to be vulnerable, or I perceive it to
Yeah.
be unsafe, it doesn't even have to actually be, but if I perceive it to be unsafe, then it is, right? And then there's all this dissonance. And so intellectually, we might want to be vulnerable. We read Brene Brown. We know that it's good for us. But then we also are like scared shitless, right? That if
Mhm.
we do, we're going to get hurt. And so we got to be careful about how much dissonance we create inside ourselves and inside our rooms, whether they're companies,
Mhm.
family systems, other relationships, so that
Mhm.
our minds, our hearts, and our bodies can sort of be navigating them kind of at
Mhm.
the same pace and not get kind of swiped down by negative impacts that might throw things back a bit.
Mhm.
Yeah. Frank Anderson, who's one of the sort of leading IFS people, has this saying, it's not vulnerability that's the problem, it's what happens in our vulnerability that can be really impactful. And so, yes, of course, all of this has the caveat of, vulnerability there's different spaces and different people and different environments in which is appropriate. That there's different levels of vulnerability based on different levels of relationship, and so those are really important to know, engage as well. Yeah.
Mhm.
And being able to discern, right? I mean, I think that's one of the tricky parts, right? Uh, Sometimes we fall into bad relationship patterns, right? And we're like, well, I tried to be myself and vulnerable, and look how that turned out. It turned out so bad, right? And you're like,
Mhm.
well, and so over time we have to learn, like, what is my work, right? How do I show up? What are the walls I bring? What are the choices I make? And then who are those safe people? How do I take a little baby step to find out that they are more safe or less safe in ways that are meaningful but not dangerous, real dangers or not real, like perceived dangers.
Mhm.
And then once I have one relationship where I can be more of myself and more and more and more of myself, then how do I index and say, oh, well, here's a new person. When I'm with this new person, do I have the same sensations as when I'm with this other? Can I perceive a sense of safety in other relationships so that I can make wise decisions going forward.
Mhm. Yeah, I believe at work, it starts at the top, right? Like if you don't set that culture and and you expose yourself in a vulnerable way to somebody that's not in that mind space, it's gonna be disaster, right? And so it has to start from the top of the leader has to be able to be open to that, to be open to having authentic conversations with somebody about their job performance or how they're doing or how they're struggling, how they can be better as a leader to them, and allowing themselves to open that up to create that culture that will permeate down, hopefully through the organization. But there's always going to be in everywhere bad apples, right? There's always going to be people that destroy that or make it non-sensitive. We talk a lot about active listening and the fact of how you listen in moments with the people that you work with, and it's almost like you have to be selective because you can't actively listen to every single conversation throughout the day. You have to pick a certain time that that this is, hey, I just need to kind of get not distracted and kind of put things down and actually look at them and have non-judgmental curiosity about what's going on versus assuming things are happening. And it's the same thing with vulnerability, right? Like, hey, this is a moment that maybe feels like I can be vulnerable and it feels right versus just saying something in the middle of a big meeting and everybody's like, whoa, what's up? What's going on? So
Yeah.
being selective of how you do it, but yeah.
Joe, what you said kind of reminds me of like those like I want to say they're like JPEGs or like one of those like little internet little clips where it's like there's the leader versus like the ruler, where it's like when you're in charge of people, you should be the leader, like showing everyone versus like the ruler, which is like they're carrying you.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Yeah, there's those little stick arts where like they're the leader's pointing behind them where everybody should go versus the leader being the guy in front of them or the person in front of them that's taking them with them, right? Instead of not just pointing where to go, but actually being in the game with them. We call it player coach, being a player coach, right? You're coaching, but you're also playing at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why this is an interesting kind of path for this conversation, but that's why I think, Joe, what you do is so important. Leadership coaching, right? Because tone from the top is essential.
Mhm,
And you think about that ripple effect of sort of healing the collective.
mhm,
The more healed our leaders are, the more spaciousness those under or with them are able to
mhm,
also heal, and the
mhm,
more sort of acting from a trauma response or just a lack of
mhm,
self-awareness the leader is,
mhm,
the more constricted, the fewer the possibilities. You might have
mhm,
pockets of safety and vulnerability and generative collaboration, but there will always be that ceiling.
mhm, mhm,
Yeah.
mhm. Thank you. Yeah. How we doing, Jess?
We're doing great. I also just want to. We're great. We're doing great.
Okay.
You guys are amazing. I haven't said much because I'm like, this is amazing. I don't want to interrupt anything. I just want everyone. It's just I'm eating it up. But kind of moving on. Everything you've kind of said, like everything to me, like it's bringing like a really interesting kind of thought in mind because you know the saying where it's like, oh, hurt people. It makes me think of like, well, what was the flip of that? The flip of it is like healing people help heal people. And I think
Mhm,
that was like kind of my big take, like one of my kind of takeaways from like all of this talking and stuff. And then also kind of thinking about like how different generations interact and everything and like how you can tell where everyone's kind of at. So like for my generation I can speak from is like we actively compliment each other in public. We're like, I love your shirt, I love your shoes, like you're doing amazing. Like we're very positive and very vulnerable even in our street actions towards each other, especially on like my campus at university. It's very active in that way. Yet when I like interact with maybe my sister's generation or my parents' generation, it's a little bit more quiet, you know, where it's
mhm,
like you're sitting in an elevator and you're just like, hello, You know what I'm saying? Where you're just like,
Mhm.
who's this person who's standing beside me, instead of being like, hello. And it kind of just, it reminds me of like how each generation is like kind of different, and how um life has impacted them in a way to make them that kind of way, if you get what I mean.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean that's the interesting piece, right? Is that when, we are shaped most significantly in those early sort of years, and each generation and culture, it changes so dramatically. There's been, major historical events over the last few decades, and different parenting techniques, or different like paradigms around how to raise children, or what role children should have, or what's appropriate socially or not. And so each time there's new sort of, refinement of these concepts that,
Mhm.
guide us through society. It makes for significant changes. And, with each new generation there's new learning as well. And your generation has the benefit of the, advances both like in technology and science and understanding, that, yeah, that I hear you sort of naming that there's a cultural experience that you have of much more, sounds like much more commonplace to just interact, and a greater ease and expectation of interaction with each other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so like, an example of this just in my own family is I've worked with my dad for many, many years, most of my life before he passed away. And he was a very command and control. I mean, he was military background. He was, baby boomer. He was everything. He was kind of a more command control. And if you ask questions, you have to do so in a respectful way, not in a meeting, not in front of everybody. You got to kind of take it offline and kind of ask questions and things like that. And he would be happy to answer anything, but it was all in the appearance of him being in control and nobody challenging him. And then me, starting my career kind of down that same path. And because that's what I watched, and then realizing that this is not my style. It is a little bit some command, but it's not control maybe. And so it was a different style of that I had to kind of find for myself in the way in which I led and lead people, which was a kind of a journey in itself of trying to figure out what that was and what's going to work for me, because I knew that this didn't work for me. So how was it going to work for everybody else from what I was receiving? And then I worked with my son, and my daughters, and they're much more curious, in the questioning and understanding of why we do things. And they're more open to that concept of like truly trying to like, why is that? Like, why? I would never ask that. Like I would get, which is my need to conform, which is based off of that experience that when I get up with conflict, I seek to conform or withdraw because I didn't want to get in the lasers of the sight of that command and control type personality. And so when I see it in the younger generation of a much more curious, much more open, much more inquisitive, right? And there's maybe some things that are lacking on the authority and the respect side, but there's, which cause challenges in a workplace. But it's all like what you're saying is it's the different generations and how they deal with issues, right?
Yeah, and then what do we do when there's like 4 generations in the workplace,
Yeah.
right? And
Hmm.
it can be really tricky because there are and lots of boomers still working, a
Yeah.
lot of Gen Z, right?
That's our life, right? We were taking care of the silent generation, and then we got baby boomers, and then we got, you know, Gen whatever I am, and then I don't even know what I am, Gen Xer. I don't know what I am, but and then you got the Gen, millennials. You got all of them in the same community.
Yeah. It's tricky too because there are generational differences, and there are real ones, particularly as it applies to tradition and hierarchy and authority, and real thoughts about
Mhm.
that among all of those generations. But then there's also just sort of the development of a life, right? What is
Mhm.
true in your early 20s because you are a person in your early 20s is different than when you're in your 30s, 40s, 50s, and then also different when you're in your 60s, 70s, and 80s. We are going through different stages of life with different capacities, different understandings, different forms of wisdom. And so it's like understanding how all those things show up. We don't actually know what Gen Z is going to be like when it's over, because they're still right here. They're still, I
Mhm.
mean, quite frankly, a lot of them still are having their executive function, right? Be fully formed. They're still like figuring out how like that significant wave of hormonal cycles is gonna like play out, right? And so it's it's easy, I think, for all of us to draw conclusions about the different generations, but some of it is actually what young people have been saying about older people since, Roman,
Yeah,
right?
right.
And so it's like I think in relationally, when we're operating in family systems or in organizational systems, when we are stuck together, right? We can choose who we go out to dinner with, but we can't really choose who we are related to or who we work with in most cases. It's like, how do we bring group awareness to both the generational stuff and also the life cycle stuff, besides the individual interpersonal stuff, so that we can um, be a little bit less quick to draw conclusions, especially negative ones, which are pretty easy to draw, and then give more grace to each other when we have those conflicts and friction points.
Mm.
Yeah, I was gonna say kind of the same point of like seeing like for me I was gonna give the example of my parents are baby boomers and I am Gen Z and that is a lot of space in between. Um and like watching how they interact and they give advice about like, oh well you should do this for work and job and
Mhm.
life. And me being like, well that doesn't always apply to today's standard.
Mhm.
And it's very interesting. Also having like friends work in like in the workplace. I have like I guess the coworkers I have are more Gen X kind of. And even then, like to me, I feel very close, way closer to that generation more than I do to like millennials, which are like the ones right before us, and like my older siblings in a way. Yeah, just like watching the difference between them all has been kind of crazy, and like watching us interact and of seeing like where 2 points are and then seeing the gap of trying to make connection and communicate but seeing the gaps of communication is also very interesting to me, and that kind of like
Mhm.
intergenerational mess.
Mhm.
Jesse, you had said something earlier around like the distinction between big traumas and and little ones, like the scrapes on the knee. And I think especially for that like what you're sort of saying, like these differences of communicating and that generational, this is it, it's an interesting distinction because my experience, the big traumas are, they're, they're so clear, right? It's very clear cut what happened. They are much easier to sort of pinpoint, and that sometimes these small t's that can be in the way that messaging or cultural things come through and how it lands for us when we're young, those can be really hard to pinpoint exactly what they are because they're not so big or dramatic or clear. There's sort of these little cuts. And
Mhm.
when we're young and we're dependent completely on the caregivers around us, and we're small little humans in a really big world, um, the reliance on others, and so the impact, the shock to the system when there's a messaging that lands a certain way, or an experience that's frightening or very uncertain for a child, can really linger in our system and shape much of what we've sort of been talking about. And I think the generational, if we're speaking specifically about lines, it can be in these very subtle ways, these very small kind of repeat traumas or repeat little incidents that can really affect how we perceive things. And one of the things that we've think has been a thread through each of the topics covered is the assumptions that we make, and that the more something is up in our system and the more under threat we are because of past experiences, or because of concepts that we formed about how people are or the way situations are going to go, or if this is threatening, is our assumptions really sort of narrow. And when we don't have that in effect, when we aren't under threat because we've gone through this experience in the past, we can be much more open, we can be much more curious, we're not so quick to form judgments. And that's a natural reaction under threat. We're wired to also survive. That'll always come first and foremost. And so that, knowing that's there, and being really that awareness piece that we've sort of talked about, but really conscious of what are the subtle ways that I think Candace spoke of, like, find ourselves contracting, what are the cues that we know when something's affecting us, and that we're maybe having a bigger response to what somebody's saying, or that something might seem like what Joe mentioned, like speaking in a room and having someone ask a question is threatening to someone's control, and so it's just not allowed. So being really conscious of what in the little ways that we feel those, like, halts in our system that sort of cause us to do a mini freeze or a mini panic, and then the behavior that unfolds immediately following that, I think is really important to tap into, because it can be a little harder to identify.
Yeah, that's a beautiful expression of that. And I would say that was it was death by 1,000 cuts for me, right? Of those little ones. I never had the big ones like you talk about, the big traumas, thankfully. But it was for me in the way in which I handled stress, the way in which I handled interpersonal conflict, the way in which I, had, if there was something that needed to be addressed, and your voice and being able to speak up for yourself. And it was just like these 1,000 little cuts that I can't pick one thing that caused it, but you look at yourself 20 years down the road and you're completely numb on the inside.
Mhm.
You don't feel anything.
Mhm.
And it's like you don't care about anything, and nothing gets you too high, nothing gets you too low. It's like you trained yourself to be neutral on everything. And that's just not a great way to live. And so then the work to try and open that yourself back up, and then feeling your heart open up and shut, and being in a relationship or something, and it opens up and something happens and then it shuts, and you can feel like I could physically feel that. I'm like, this is crazy. It's like this something's sci-fi going on inside of me, because it was so long of not feeling that. But it was all of those ways in which I showed up in the world based off all these little cuts, is like what you were saying.
Mhm.
Well, and I think that's one of the interesting, none of this generational stuff is cut and dry, right? So it's like
Mhm.
these broad generalizations that are sometimes useful, sometimes not. But I don't know about you all, right? Of the Gen X region, but like I understood what big T trauma was as a young person growing up. I knew what it was, but little T trauma was not a thing. Little T trauma was life. And 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 I think one of the shifts that we have seen is young people now understand that little T trauma is a thing as well as big T trauma. And so they're much more um open about that.
Mhm.
And so, and even now, all these years later, having done all sorts of healing work, all sorts of blah, 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 sometimes I get a little tight when we're
Mhm.
talking about little T trauma. And I think part of that reason is a real desire for all of us to equally know that we are resilient. And so teasing out in my own self is sometimes difficult. Am I having a habituated response to like shake it off, put some dirt on it, or am I responding to a concern that we're not accessing our full power, that we're essentially over indexing on the little hurts, and not bringing with it our capacity to heal from both little and large ones. And I don't have a full
Mhm.
answer for my own self yet. I just think both things are possible.
Right. Yeah, and our generation is like, it's okay to have these emotions, right? It's like normal. And you're getting ready to go to give a big speech, or you're getting ready to go on a game, and you're like, I shouldn't be nervous. I gotta quit. I gotta prep more. I gotta do more. Which then makes you, by shoving it down, that makes you more nervous, right? Versus just allowing yourself to embrace that. Yeah, I'm nervous because I care and I want to do good, and that it's okay. And then you walk out, and it's like you're much more calmer. You don't have the pregame, meltdown or pre-speech meltdown because you're embracing that. Yeah, I should be nervous. This is a big deal, and
Yeah.
embracing that, right?
Yeah,
And
and
allowing
that's
yourself
not wrong.
versus before where you like toughen up. You shouldn't have those. Just go do it.
Yeah. I think that's the sweet spot, Joe, is like noticing what is actually happening,
Mhm.
accepting what is actually, yeah, of
Mhm.
course. Yeah, you're scared. You're about to go talk to 500 people. Like it would be
Yeah,
weird if we're not scared, right?
yeah.
And then going and doing it, right?
Mhm.
And so sort of the less expansive options would be to either tamp it down, like you said, right? Where then it
Mhm.
just like amplifies. You shouldn't be afraid.
Mhm.
Or or conversely, I'm feeling anxious and afraid and something is wrong. And so I should not be
Mhm.
doing this thing,
Mhm.
right? Both of those kind of polar responses aren't in really furtherance of our like full expression of who we are. And
Mhm.
so I love that idea of that middle ground where
Mhm.
we sense what is happening, we accept what is happening, and we persevere because it is a thing that we are actually interested in doing.
Mhm.
And I think this is one of the biggest pieces that, yeah, for those of us that have had these, these little t traumas, is in that intertwined is not knowing how, not having learned or having had it modeled, like what Joe said, like what to do with these emotions.
Mhm.
And I know for myself, I, even just till recently, I was so comfortable feeling like joy and like excitement. Like I never considered like how is it coming off of me, or like what impact is it having on others. And yet when I experienced negative emotions, the tougher emotions, I recently recognized that in this particular direction, I had formed the belief that I needed to contain these. Like the very first thing to do was to like shut them down and like bring them into my, like put a lid on it so that it didn't come out and like affect, others.
Mhm.
It didn't lash out. And that was because of my own experiences, younger, having like emotion, like come lashing out, out at me, and knowing how painful that was, and not wanting to do that, for others. But in a way, I learned not how to, I didn't learn how to be with these stronger emotions that are also really important, that really tell me important things. And so this whole other side of the emotion wheel had been really cut off for me, and learning to be with that in a healthy way, and that I could feel it and experience it so that I could actually bring it into relationships in a way that made
Mhm.
in a way that enabled me to be better at being received. I could be with my emotion and not lash out at someone, and so that there was room for someone to comfort me when I actually needed it, rather than making me not so pleasant to comfort. So
Mhm.
uh, this piece around what we do with emotions has been a really big part of relearning how to move through the world without these beliefs that I formed from these early experiences.
Mhm.
Yeah, I feel that, Kirsten. I noticed recently how I have just like sometimes I'm okay. Like, yeah, I know I'm sad, I'm mad, I'm frustrated. Like they're up. But I also have noticed that sometimes I try to rewrite it right away.
Mm.
Oh, I'm sad about this. I'm not that sad. Or I'm sad about that, but it's okay. I'm, and so one of my practices now is like, oh, actually, I'm just plain old sad.
Mm.
Of course, there's all sorts of beautiful things in the world. That's true. And what I am feeling right now is sad.
Mhm.
And that takes some that's my interrupter that I need to continue to work on.
Mhm. Yeah, and for me, it's like I'm a quiet internal processor,
Mm.
and I don't let anybody into the
Mm.
ciphering. I don't know how to say it any other word, like trying to figure it out. And so I'm really quiet as I'm trying to figure it out. And I'm like down 5 different rabbit holes, right? Of trying to connect this thing that I'm trying to figure out. And I don't engage anybody in relationships. And so you can kind of distance you so people can interpret me as distant or angry or whatever it might be. But I'm just thinking about something and I'm so deep into it. And once I figure it out, I'm okay talking about it. But if somebody asks me in the middle of that, I don't even know how to begin that conversation because I don't know what hole to come out of to even have it. And it's like a physically painful, like how to get these words out. And so now it's like to get comfortable with not having to have it all figured out. And so being more comfortable to share the unedited version of what I'm thinking about because it's like going to make no sense. But if for me to be in a relationship, I have to share that, right? And I have to communicate what I'm thinking about. And you figure out, I thought 2 months about this, finally figured it out, took action, and then 30 seconds later, there's a better option that somebody just came off the cuff that I didn't include anybody in, right? And then all of a sudden it's like, okay, well, that works even better. But I just wasted 2 months trying to figure this out on my own.
Yeah. There's that interdependence.
Yeah,
That would be helpful again.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think in relationships though that's really helpful, right? I go around the world thinking that if something is up, like Joe, you and I will have a conflict, we should just talk it out. Come on, Joe, let's
Mhm.
talk it out right now because we're
Mhm.
together and that's how we'll be closer. And
Mhm.
you might want to just like take a minute to
I'm
digest,
like, what? We have conflict?
right? And I think just recognizing that different people are different is a
Mhm.
really good start and not to assume that everybody wants to like hash it out right in the moment, that actually might make them feel unsafe and that we'll get
Mhm.
really bad responses if we do
Mhm.
that. Um,
Yeah.
and that it doesn't mean, so sometimes my default would be, oh, you don't care, right? Because
Mhm.
you're leaving me, right?
Mhm.
When actually you might just wanting to actually be as caring as possible, which means you respond to me when you've got your own feelings figured out. Um,
Mhm.
and so how do we communicate how we are and what we're trying to do, especially in the heat of a moment where something has gone wrong? And I
Mhm.
think that's where we can become more skillful communicators and more
Mhm.
skillful in relationships is not only understanding how we are and how what we need and what works best for us, but understanding how our partner in that relationship, whatever kind,
Yeah.
what works for them.
Yeah.
And then how are you going to do it together, right? Because it doesn't mean
Mhm.
we have to conform exactly to what they want or they have to conform exactly to what
Mhm.
we want, but like what is that space in how we do things together?
Mhm. Yeah, parenting's the same way, right? Like we're so interested in what our kids are doing or want to know what's going on, and we get aggressive because we're asking a lot of questions. And then um, somebody told me a long time ago when I was raising my kids, they were like, just be patient, and when they talk, don't say anything, and they'll just keep talking and talking and talking, and that's true. That's what I found is if I'm patient enough, they'll finally say what's they're feeling versus like this big conflict that I've created to try and get it out of them or something.
Especially if they're in a car or on a walk where they don't have
Yeah.
to look at you, which
Yeah, I
is
mean, I was
really
in the car
terrible for
one
them.
time for 8 hours before, like I was patient, I was patient, I was patient, talk about stuff, and then 8 hours, and all of a sudden it just starts. And it's like for 2, 3 hours of talking, right? Of just being patient. But like you said, you can't always, in a relationship and a connection of a marriage or whatever else, there's times that you can do that and there's times that you can't. So,
Yeah, I think it's also important for like everyone to know that like we're watching is like there is no guidebook to anything.
no.
I think we have societal standards and expect this
Mhm.
guidebook, and if we don't meet it, it's like the shame versus empowerment that we've kind of been speaking about and everything. And it's like sometimes in life it has to be what works for you and like
Yeah.
what helps you, what makes you feel good, what makes you a better communicator, what helps heal you. And it's
Mhm.
not always one thing. And I think that's something that we get like people get hung up on, right? Is
Mhm.
that
Yeah, I mean, exactly right. You can look at somebody like they run a business, they have a family, they have all this stuff, they know everything, they got it figured out. And for the most part, in anybody I interact with, they don't have any idea what they're doing either. Right. And so it's the perception of how we handle that ourselves, then is to know that they don't know what's going on. So then people are like, there's something must be wrong with me. There's nothing wrong with you. You're just trying to figure it out. Just like you said, you're just trying to figure it out like everybody else is. Right. And there is no, you ever get to some point, and there's never a time where there's no trouble. There's never a time when there's not a challenge in a relationship. There's never a time when it's not going to be tough. There's never a time where it's going to be all figured out and everything's going to flow. That's just the nature of life. And it's you learning how to deal with all of those situations emotionally as you go through it.
But I think one of the guidebook things that we do know is that love, right?
Mm-hmm.
Love is one of the keys to personal happiness.
Yeah.
There's the Harvard study where for generations, right? They've been following multiple generations now um, of 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 subjects, and they interview them over different periods of their life, and it's been going on for I don't know 80 years, right? And
Mm-hmm.
and there's a book called The Good Life, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
right now, and they're like it's kind of the two keys to happiness that they talk about is how much love do you have in your life, and do you
Mm-hmm.
have coping mechanisms that bring you closer to love?
Mm-hmm.
It's just it, right?
Love wins, right?
Love wins. And so um we get fixated in modern times, especially in the United States, about intimate partners and how they're going to do all the things for us, which is impossible. Spoiler alert. But I'm not saying that I want to diminish the importance of them, but it is love writ large. It is love that we have for our families of origin if they're healthy for us. It is love for the maid families that we create over time. It is the love of our friends, and our colleagues, and yes, our intimate partners that are um, the the sustenance. Honestly, I think the sustenance for navigating those ups and downs and this experience of life that is so important. And so having capacity to enter into new relationships and to sustain meaningful ones over time,
Mm-hmm.
I think is actually one of the most healthy things that we can do for ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that.
and as we kind of close on time soon, I kind of want to end with one question that I have for all of you, kind of not only about this episode, but I guess in life too, relationship wise. I know kids, you might have already answered it for yourself, um, which is like, what is your biggest pull for like healing relationship wise, or for maybe listeners who are trying to figure out what path they're on, what is that for you guys? What do you want? What is one thing you wish for them to offer for them, I guess? Maybe from the conversation we've already spoken about, or just like a brief thing.
I'll start. I
That's a deep question.
yeah. I have I believe that we are all interconnected.
Mhm.
Just fundamentally, I believe we are all interconnected, that we are all essentially one. And when I see all of the despair in the world, it can be overwhelming to me. And so I guess I would say that if there are other people out there who see hard and bad things happening and feel powerless in the face of it, that they can take heart and know that each relationship, each genuine relationship that they enter into is an antidote to that it is actually healing. We might not be able to solve problems that are thousands of miles away from us, but we can create health and wellness and wholeness and love in our circles, and we can make those circles ever wider and stronger. And to me, that is a very significant motivator.
Man, it's hard to follow that one, Cadence. That's great. I would say life is a labyrinth, right? Life, you're exactly where you were supposed to be, and you're exactly where you are and where you're meant to go. And there's nothing you can do that's going to change that, right? Like you're just going to be on this path, taking one step at a time and trying to figure it out. So it's not a maze of dead ends and wrong relationships or wrong turns or things like that. You're just going through life in the labyrinth, and you are and where you're meant to be at that moment and where you're going in the future. I would say that that's would be my hope for everybody, of not feeling regret or anger or frustration for wasted time or a wasted life. We only get one life, and it's going to end up wherever it's going to end up, and we're wherever we're supposed to be right now.
Wow, yeah, two powerful things. Gosh, I guess yeah, to go a different route or to offer something sort of separate and on top of that, I'm something that's really up for me is the power of compassion. And you know, in all of this that we've been talking about today, um, the ability to interact with others in this authentic way and to in this vulnerable way and to build these sort of, you know, rich relationships and have these opportunities to understand, you know, how we show up and how others are and how to create, you know, rich relationships in that space. That it starts from being really aware and honest with what's happening within ourselves so that we can bring that into the world. And I think that there's so much beauty when that is shared with others. We grow and develop by being you know, ourselves reflected, you know, reflected by others, and also by you know, bringing ourselves out into the world. And it's really hard to do that when we're not being compassionate with ourselves for the things that are coming up. And so if I was to offer one thing that I think is a really important starting point when you start to explore our traumas and the way that we're showing up in relationships or the way that they're impacting relationships, it's to really to have a lot of love for those versions of yourselves that came before and had those experiences and are influencing the way that you know, that you are experiencing things now. And it's that that gives the space to look at it lovingly, to bring it into the mix so that it can be, like Joe had mentioned, that relationships are also, it can be where the hurt happens, and it's also
Mhm.
where it's healed. And it's by having these experiences that actually reset our systems for what's actually true now and what the standard is now. And so the more that we can practice that, and the vulnerability starts with that compassion and love. So that would be my tidbit to throw in there.
Beautiful, Kirsten.
Like all of yours are very beautiful. I'm very touched from having you guys all here. Thank you guys so much. Thank you all for your wise, sage words of wisdom and insight and compassion and love and meaning. I'm greatly appreciated. I'm sure our listeners are greatly appreciative. I'll give my little words of advice too, I guess, because I made you all do it. Might as well.
Yeah.
I think my words are like, it's never a straight path. Like it's like the yellow brick road. It winds, it goes through woods, it goes everywhere. And you know, hope was the last thing in Pandora's box and it's always kept there for a reason. So there will always be more. And humans are imperfect. And we will keep you will always keep growing. So I think that's kind of my words to give out and words to take away.
Thank you, Jess.
Yes.
Thank you guys.